Did you know that some American cities are spending billions of taxpayer dollars just to handle the surge of illegal immigration? Or that in some areas, crime rates have spiked, homelessness has skyrocketed, and emergency shelters are completely overwhelmed? This isn't just a political debate, it's a real crisis that's hitting major U.S. cities harder than ever before. But which cities are being affected the most? And more importantly, is your city on the list? From New York to Los Angeles, once thriving cities are now facing severe economic strain, public safety concerns, and overcrowded hospitals and schools. Residents are frustrated, businesses are struggling, and city officials are desperately trying to keep things under control. But who's paying the price? And what happens if things continue at this rate? In today's video, we're counting down the 10 U.S. cities that have been impacted the most by illegal immigration, and some of them may surprise you. Stay with us as we break down the numbers, the stories, and the shocking reality of how illegal immigration is reshaping America's biggest cities. And trust us, you'll want to see which city takes the #1 spot, because it's not the one you think. Let's get started on fire. Number 10. Chicago, Illinois. Chicago, once known as the heart of America's Midwest, is now facing serious challenges due to the overwhelming surge of illegal immigration. Crime is on the rise, especially in areas already struggling with violence. Many neighborhoods, particularly on the south and west sides, have reported an increase in violent crime, with some attributing it to the growing number of undocumented individuals. While officials debate the exact connection, local residents are feeling the effects firsthand. Police resources are already stretched thin, and the surge of new arrivals has only added to the strain on law enforcement. Public services are overloaded. Homeless shelters and food banks are now operating beyond capacity, struggling to provide aid to both longtime residents and the newly arrived migrant population. The city has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on temporary housing and assistance programs, leaving taxpayers questioning the long-term sustainability of these efforts. Schools and hospitals are feeling the impact. Local schools are dealing with overcrowded classrooms, struggling to accommodate thousands of new students who often require additional resources, such as bilingual education and specialized support services. At the same time, hospitals and clinics are reporting longer wait times and resource shortages as emergency rooms fill up with new patients in need of urgent care. Frustration is growing among residents. Many longtime Chicagoans are frustrated with how the situation is being handled. Protests have erupted across the city, with residents demanding that local leaders find a better solution before the city's economy and infrastructure collapse under the pressure. Is Chicago beyond saving, or can the city recover before it's too late? Coming up next, a city that's spending billions on migrants while locals struggle: New York City. Number 9. New York City, New York. New York City, America's financial capital and one of the most iconic cities in the world, is now buckling under the weight of an unprecedented migrant crisis. Once a symbol of opportunity, NYC is now facing a breaking point as it struggles to house, feed, and support the massive influx of undocumented immigrants. The city's homeless shelters are at full capacity, forcing officials to convert hotels, school gyms, and even police stations into makeshift housing facilities. Despite these efforts, thousands of migrants are still left without a place to stay, and some are sleeping on sidewalks, in subway stations, or in overcrowded tent cities. The problem is so severe that Mayor Eric Adams has warned that the crisis could destroy New York City. The financial toll is staggering. NYC has already spent over $2 billion on migrant assistance, and that number is expected to surpass $12 billion in the next few years. These funds cover food, shelter, healthcare, and legal aid, but many taxpayers are questioning whether the city can afford it. Local programs meant to help struggling New Yorkers are being cut or defunded, leaving low-income residents feeling abandoned by their own government. Hospitals and emergency services are overwhelmed. Doctors and nurses are reporting longer wait times, overcrowded ERs, and supply shortages, making it harder for citizens to get the care they need. Schools are also struggling, as thousands of migrant children are enrolled, straining an already underfunded education system. Frustration is growing, with protests erupting across the city. Residents are demanding action while city officials warn that things will only get worse without federal support. Up next, a city where homelessness is spiraling out of control: Los Angeles, California. Number 8. Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles, once a city of dreams, is now facing one of the worst homelessness and crime crises in the nation, and the surge in illegal immigration is making the situation even more dire. With tens of thousands of migrants arriving in recent years, LA's public services, housing, and economy are stretched beyond their limits. Homelessness is spiraling out of control. The city was already dealing with an exploding homeless population, and the influx of migrants has pushed the crisis to unprecedented levels. Skid Row, known for its large homeless encampments, is expanding as newly arrived migrants join the thousands already living on the streets. Shelters are overwhelmed, and many migrants end up living in makeshift tents under bridges or in dangerous conditions. Public schools are struggling. Thousands of migrant children have entered the school system, but many lack proper documentation or English language skills, forcing schools to redirect resources and teachers. Class sizes are growing, and education quality is declining as a result. Hospitals and emergency services are at a breaking point. With more people relying on public health care, ER wait times have skyrocketed, and essential services are being pushed to the limit. Some hospitals have reported supply shortages and understaffed medical teams, putting both migrants and longtime residents at risk. Crime rates are rising, and many Angelenos are feeling unsafe in their own city. Carjackings, theft, and violent crimes are becoming more common, leading to increased frustration and public outcry. Can Los Angeles recover, or is the city heading toward total collapse? Next up, a city with a booming economy but a migrant crisis spiraling out of control. Denver, Colorado. Number 7. Denver, Colorado. Denver, a city known for its booming economy and high quality of life, is now facing an immigration crisis that is pushing its resources to the limit. Once a thriving hub for business and tourism, Denver is now struggling to keep up with the massive influx of migrants, and the effects are being felt across the city. Public spending has skyrocketed. Denver has already spent tens of millions of dollars on emergency shelter, food programs, and health care for migrants. But city officials warn that the budget is unsustainable, and without federal aid, Denver could soon be forced to cut essential services. Taxpayers are growing frustrated, asking why their money is going to migrant support while housing costs, food prices, and utility bills continue to rise. Homeless shelters and housing programs are overwhelmed. The city was already dealing with a serious homelessness problem, and now with thousands of additional people arriving, affordable housing has become nearly impossible to find. Many migrants are forced to sleep in overcrowded shelters, city parks, or even inside bus stations, creating a public safety concern. The job market is tightening and wages are being driven down. Migrants, often desperate for work, are taking jobs at lower wages, making it harder for local workers to compete. Small business owners are feeling the impact, with some struggling to balance the demand for cheap labor while keeping their businesses profitable. Tensions are rising among residents. Protests and heated city council meetings have erupted as Denver locals demand action. People are asking, how much more can the city handle? Coming up next, the nation's capital is dealing with a crisis of its own, Washington, D.C. Number 6. Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., the seat of American power, is now struggling to handle a migrant crisis that city officials never anticipated. While politicians in Congress debate immigration policies, the streets of D.C. are facing the harsh realities of an overwhelmed system. Homeless shelters are overflowing. The city's emergency housing system has been stretched to its limit, forcing officials to place migrants in hotels, recreation centers, and even makeshift tent cities. Despite these efforts, thousands remain without stable housing, leaving many to sleep in parks, subway stations, and abandoned buildings. Public services are nearing collapse. Hospitals are reporting severe overcrowding, with emergency rooms struggling to handle the surge of uninsured patients. Public schools are running out of space as thousands of migrant children have entered the education system, creating a staffing and resource crisis. Teachers are under immense pressure as schools scramble to provide bilingual instruction and special education services. The financial burden is staggering. Washington, D.C. has spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to accommodate migrants, but city officials warn that the costs are becoming unsustainable. Local taxpayers are growing frustrated, questioning why their public resources are being stretched so thin, while crime and homelessness continue to rise. Frustration is turning into outrage. Protests have broken out across the city, with residents demanding that the federal government step in with real solutions before the crisis spirals further out of control. Up next, a border state city that's feeling the full impact of illegal immigration. Phoenix, Arizona. Number 5. Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix, Arizona, one of the fastest growing cities in America, is now facing the full impact of illegal immigration due to its close proximity to the U.S.-Mexico border. What was once a city known for its booming economy and affordable living is now dealing with rising crime, overwhelmed public services, and growing frustration among residents. Law enforcement is stretched thin. With thousands of migrants crossing into Arizona every month, local police and border patrol agents are struggling to keep up. Human smuggling, drug trafficking, and cartel-related crimes have skyrocketed, making Phoenix one of the cities hit hardest by the border crisis. Officers are working longer hours, and crime rates in certain areas have seen a significant spike. Homelessness is on the rise. Shelters are overflowing, and migrants who can't find housing are setting up makeshift camps in parks and underpasses. Many residents worry that these encampments are fueling crime and unsafe living conditions, while business owners report an increase in theft, vandalism, and break-ins. The healthcare system is collapsing. Hospitals in Phoenix are overrun with new patients, many of whom require emergency medical care but lack insurance. This has led to longer wait times, overworked medical staff, and financial strain on public hospitals that are struggling to stay afloat. Residents are demanding action. Protests have erupted across the city, with people calling for stronger border enforcement and more federal support to relieve the pressure. The question remains, how much longer can Phoenix sustain this crisis before reaching its breaking point? Coming up next, a city known for its progressive policies but now struggling with its own immigration crisis, San Francisco, California. Number 4. San Francisco, California. San Francisco, once known as a hub of innovation and prosperity, is now facing a growing crisis fueled by illegal immigration. With its progressive policies and sanctuary city status, San Francisco has long been a destination for migrants. But now, the city is struggling to keep up with the financial, social, and public safety consequences of its own policies. Homelessness is spiraling out of control. The city was already dealing with one of the worst homelessness crises in the country, but the arrival of thousands of undocumented migrants has pushed it to new extremes. Entire neighborhoods are now filled with tents, makeshift shelters, and people sleeping in the streets, leading to a sharp increase in crime, drug use, and unsanitary conditions. Crime rates are rising. Business owners in downtown San Francisco report record-high theft, burglaries, and violent crimes, leading many to shut down or relocate. Some say the city's lenient policies have made it a hot spot for lawlessness, while frustrated residents feel ignored by their leaders. Public services are overwhelmed. Hospitals are seeing longer wait times, and city-run health clinics are struggling to provide care to both long-time residents and migrants. Schools are also feeling the pressure, with overcrowded classrooms and a lack of resources for migrant children who often need additional language and educational support. Despite spending hundreds of millions of dollars on housing programs, food assistance, and healthcare for migrants, the city continues to sink deeper into crisis. Many are asking, will San Francisco's progressive approach ultimately lead to its downfall? Next up, a city at the front lines of the border crisis, El Paso, Texas. Number 3. El Paso, Texas. El Paso, Texas is ground zero for the illegal immigration crisis. Sitting directly on the U.S.-Mexico border, the city has become one of the first stops for thousands of migrants crossing into the United States every day. What was once a relatively peaceful border town is now overwhelmed by an unmanageable influx of people, stretching its resources to the limit. The city's emergency shelters are beyond capacity. Thousands of migrants sleep on sidewalks, in parks, and outside government buildings because there simply isn't enough space to house them. Makeshift camps have sprung up all over the city, creating serious public health and safety concerns. Many residents fear that El Paso's infrastructure is on the verge of total collapse. Hospitals and first responders are completely overwhelmed. Local emergency rooms are packed, and ambulance response times have significantly increased as medical professionals struggle to handle the constant demand. Many migrants arrive in need of urgent medical care but lack health insurance, leaving hospitals with millions of dollars in unpaid medical bills. Crime and border-related violence are on the rise. With cartel activity increasing, human smuggling and drug trafficking have become major threats to El Paso's residents. Law enforcement is doing everything they can, but resources are stretched dangerously thin. Despite its residents' resilience, El Paso is drowning in an immigration crisis with no clear solution in sight. How much longer can this city hold on? Up next, a major Texas city facing a surge in violent crime and economic strain, Houston, Texas. Number 2. Houston, Texas. Houston, the fourth largest city in the U.S., is experiencing one of the most severe illegal immigration crises in the country. As a major hub for jobs and industry, Houston has become a top destination for migrants, but the sheer number of arrivals has pushed the city's economy, public services, and safety to the edge. Violent crime is rising. Law enforcement officials have linked gang-related violence, drug trafficking, and human smuggling to the surge in illegal immigration. Neighborhoods that were once considered safe are now experiencing increased shootings, robberies, and assaults, leaving residents fearful for their safety. Police resources are stretched thin, and officers are struggling to respond to the growing crime wave. Public services are at a breaking point. The city's hospitals, shelters, and food banks are completely overwhelmed. Emergency rooms are filled beyond capacity, and local clinics are struggling to provide care for the rapidly growing population. Schools are facing the same crisis, with thousands of new students arriving, many of whom require additional language support and special resources. Teachers are overworked and underfunded, leading to a drop in education quality across the city. The economic strain is crippling local businesses. Many companies have been forced to cut wages or lay off workers as the competition for jobs intensifies. At the same time, the cost of living in Houston has skyrocketed, making it harder for both residents and new arrivals to afford housing, food, and other necessities. Frustration is turning into outrage. Protests have erupted throughout the city as residents demand stronger border security and relief from the financial burden. Many are asking, how much longer can Houston survive under this pressure? Next up, the number one U.S. city hit hardest by illegal immigration. This one may surprise you. Number 1. New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans may not be the first city that comes to mind when thinking about the immigration crisis, but this historic southern city is now facing an overwhelming surge of illegal migration, and it's hitting harder than anyone expected. Once famous for its rich culture, jazz, and food, New Orleans is now struggling with economic collapse, crime, and an overstressed public system due to the rapid influx of undocumented migrants. The job market is collapsing. New Orleans has long struggled with high unemployment rates, but the surge of migrants has intensified competition for low-wage jobs, making it even harder for local residents to find work. Some businesses are hiring migrants at lower wages, which has sparked tensions between workers and employers. Crime is spiraling out of control. The city has seen a dramatic rise in violent crimes, including carjackings, robberies, and assaults. Law enforcement is overwhelmed and understaffed, struggling to keep up with the increase in gang activity and organized crime linked to human trafficking networks. Many longtime residents are considering leaving the city altogether due to concerns about safety. Public services are failing. Homeless shelters, food banks, and medical facilities are collapsing under the pressure. The city's healthcare system is struggling to care for the massive number of new patients, leading to longer wait times and fewer available resources for both migrants and native residents. Schools are also severely overcrowded, and teachers are struggling to keep up with the surge of new students who require extra support. New Orleans is at a dangerous tipping point. The city was already dealing with economic hardship, but now, with limited resources and no clear federal assistance, many are wondering, can New Orleans survive this crisis? Or is the city doomed to collapse? What do you think? Is illegal immigration destroying America's biggest cities? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more eye-opening reports. America's cities are changing before our eyes. From New York to Los Angeles, from Houston to New Orleans, once thriving communities are now struggling to survive under the weight of an immigration crisis that seems to have no end in sight. Crime is rising. Homelessness is out of control. Schools, hospitals, and public services are being pushed beyond their limits. And yet many of our leaders still refuse to acknowledge the full impact of what's happening. The hardest part? It's the everyday people who suffer the most. Hardworking Americans, families, small business owners, students, and retirees are being forced to carry a burden they never asked for. People who have spent their whole lives building their communities are now watching them fall apart, and they feel helpless to stop it. That's why I make these videos, to bring the truth to light. But let me be honest with you, these videos are not easy to make. It takes hours of research, editing, and fact-checking to bring you the most important stories that the mainstream media won't cover. If you appreciate this kind of content, if you believe the truth needs to be heard, then please subscribe to my channel. It's one simple click, but it makes a huge difference. It helps me keep going, it helps this channel grow, and most importantly, it helps spread awareness. So before you go, hit that subscribe button turn on notifications, and share this video with others who need to see it. Together, we can keep the conversation going. Together, we can fight for the truth. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next video.